So, antenna propagation. Now, antenna propagation is a big topic, and as such I'm not going to talk about every single nuance of it, because as you change your frequency, the ideal propagation changes. For a quick example, lower frequencies have an easier time going through objects. So at say LF, low frequency, it can do a kind of propagation called ground wave, which is essentially it will travel along the ground following the curvature of the Earth, and it will keep going. Higher frequencies can't do that because they're obstructed by obstacles. Low frequency will just go through things a lot easier than higher frequencies. So for the sake of this, I'm going to keep it to HF and VHF and UHF. UHF and VHF have very similar propagation styles. So the standard way that communication happens is you will have two antennas, and they will be vertical, so they will be sticking up from, if you're holding the walkie-talkie, for sake of argument, you're holding it and the antenna is pointing up the way. And it will radiate out in all directions around it. So it will get to the receiver, but it will also go out in every other direction. It's called an omnidirectional antenna. Now, these are the line of sight style, but if you use this, and say you're on top of a mountain, and you use your omnidirectional antenna, and you see someone who is maybe, for my reference, I'll say over in England. So I'm in Northern Ireland, I'm on top of a mountain, and in theory I could see the other person who is over in England. This kind of antenna would not get me there, because a lot of the energy is wasted going in all directions. I would have to use a directional antenna to actually get that range. So that's with an omnidirectional. There are directional antennas that you can use that look somewhat like this. And you might recognize that shape. If you have a TV antenna on top of your house, it will look exactly like that, and that's the reason for that. It's a very directional antenna. So for your TV signal, you don't need to send massive amounts of information in loads of different directions. You don't need to receive in loads of different directions. You just need to receive from one station, and that's what this is really good at. It will get you massive range, provided it can actually see the target, and it will propagate out in. Now, there are going to be, again, amateur radios enthusiasts out there who are going to scoff at this, but I'm keeping it simple. It will radiate out pretty much as a beam. Now, strictly speaking, that is not true. It doesn't look like that if you could see it, but that's the general idea, is it will go in one direction and there'll be very little bleeding out the back end sides. So those are mostly VHF. You can use them for HF, especially the vertical, which has an omnidirectional propagation. But for HF, HF has quite a nice thing where it's actually blocked sort of by the sky. So in the sky there is a thing called the ionosphere, or ionosphere, which is essentially just the atmosphere. It's particles in the atmosphere. Now, if I had a VHF antenna, and we'll do the beam. That's a very poor drawing, but that's the beam antenna, and I fired that straight up. Wrong colour. When I fired that straight up, it would go straight through the ionosphere. And for sake of argument, I was trying to talk to the International Space Station, which you can do with VHF very easily if it's overhead. That would go straight through, I could talk to them. Now, if I had an HF, and I had, it would need to be a dipole, so I'll talk about what that is in a second. and I sent my signal up, it would actually go up and bounce off. Now, you might think that this is bad, and I could see why you would think that, but this is very, very, very useful. This actually allows you to bounce a signal, and theoretically you could bounce a signal around the planet, and it could come back, and you could listen to yourself talking with a bit of a delay. Any flat earthers out there, I'm sorry, but that's how it works. So I'll talk about that a bit more here. Let's just clean this up. So we will have the planet, and I am here with my dipole, and someone is, let's say, over here in Australia. That is a very poor drawing of Australia, but there's someone there in Australia with a dipole, and I want to talk to them. Now, if I was using any other kind of propagation, that would be very difficult. I would need to either potentially use a repeater, like a satellite repeater or some such, or a series of repeaters dotted around the world in order to talk to him on anything other than HF. It can be done. It can be done with a lot of tweaking and fiddling about, but believe me, HF is the way to go for this. And the way that the signal would work is essentially you would send your signal, it would go up, essentially ricochet off the ionosphere, come back down, hit the ground, bounce off the ground, ionosphere, ground, and it would hop like that round and eventually get to my target. Now, there is a downside to this. You might notice that there's gaps here. And the way that I've drawn this, he's actually in a gap. Those are blind spots. You will not get any signal in there, or it will be very weak. Now, this looks quite severe, but the whenever it comes down, that area is quite large. You're getting quite a large chunk of area covered by your signal, but equally so is the gap. The gap can be quite large as well. You can adjust this, the gap between here, by adjusting your antenna height. You make it higher or lower, and these bounces or hops will move with that. It's called your heights and gains. So you move your height to try and adjust where your signal's landing. And so that is the two main types of propagation that you would come across with VHF and UHF. Now, there are others out there. There are plenty of them, but generally speaking, if you have a mobile device or some such, the most common type of propagation you're going to see is going to be the line of sight.